Hello and welcome to Thru Port Collective. Glad to have you all hanging out with us tonight. And the scenery has changed amongst us here. We're unfortunately Tim has gotten very sick today, and so we're thinking of him and hoping that he's going to get better. But we are always glad to have Aaron Russell with us, aka Imperfect. You guys, good evening. How are you doing?
Good evening.
Good evening. I'm happy to fill Tim's seat, but I can't even begin to fill his shoes.
Good to have you, Aaron.
Yeah. So, Aaron, what you been up to lately since we last talked to you?
Well, still just putting around in the little home studio. I did my last, for a while anyway. It'll be my last SE3X video for a while. Finally got to the last filter circuit on that little box. Which that's an interesting circuit because it combines, and I talked to Greg at Studio Electronics about it, and he said they basically took the output from the 24 dB Juno filter circuit and the output from the 6 dB Juno filter circuit and combined them together. So there's some phase cancellation going on. It almost gives it a bandpass style effect, but it also has it's fairly open, so there's lots of high frequencies, but when you sweep it, it's one of my favorite on there because it just sounds very interesting, and you get unexpected results with it. And
So you can affect the high pass filter then with the envelope, whereas you can't on a Juno.
well, there is no high pass in that's so it's a 24 dB low pass filter and a 6 dB low pass filter, which that a 6 dB low pass filter is an interesting idea in and of itself, but they combine them, the two low pass filters together. I don't know how he came up with the idea, but it gives it an interesting shape to it, and it kind of does act as though there's a slight high pass filter on there because the low end rolls off and then the high end rolls off a bit, so it ends up feeling kind of like a band pass because as you sweep along, the you can hear the lows in your low, and then as you go higher, the lows are quieter and the highs open up, and then if you add resonance, or if you overdrive it, it just starts to do a lot of interesting things, and I think that's why they did it. But it's totally unconventional, and there's no other. It's not trying to emulate anything. They just did a little circuit bending and liked the result, and so they stuck it on the SC3X.
Well, good for them. I mean, sometimes companies are a little tentative about exploring new areas because some of the classic designs are so well trod, and they know that it'll do well. That it's nice to see that.
Yeah, and I'm like I said, that's my between that one and the ARP filter on that synthesizer are the two that I reach for the most often because they just got the character that I like.
Yeah. Well, that's excellent. Marshall, what have you been up to?
Yo. Not much. I've been slacking this week, actually. Other than our little intro tune that we're kind of working on, that's about all I've kind of worked on this week, besides work. So, yeah, taking it easy.
Yeah, sometimes we need weeks like those.
Yep.
Yeah, when you actually get days off or downtime, it's like, well, what do I want to do? It's like, well, I want to make some music and have some fun, and then you get into it for a while, and like, oh man, this is a lot of work.
Yeah. Well, I've still got my live rig I'm working with, and I have some other tunes that I'm gonna try and get pushed out before the end of the year. So that stuff's still on the list of to-dos for the year. So
Yeah.
plenty busy.
Running out of year, Marshall.
I know, right?
It's coming quick.
Going fast.
Yeah, was it yesterday? I was like, man, I wonder when fall starts. And so I just Googled it, or I think I asked Siri, when's fall start? It's like September 20th. Like, wait, what's today? Oh, September 20th. I had a feeling.
A couple days ago, I was like, wow, it's dark outside already. Jeez. Because, the sun it kind of does its thing, and then it quickly shifts to another thing and then does its thing. And
Yeah.
we're in the middle of that quick shift.
Yeah. Well, I had a bunch of work to get done and put out a video for Pulsar Modulars. Siren, that's what I'm looking for. So this plugin that I've been talking about, it's been really great to be using it, and I've had a lot of good application for it. It's a filter and drive, and so it's kind of based off the Yuri 565, and so you're thinking filters and EQ and that kind of thing. And I just kind of decided to come at it from a different angle, and I was like, man, this has a really great drive circuit. It has like two main stages, drive and overdrive, and had been putting it to good use. And so let me see if here I'll just play. It's like 20 or 30 seconds here. One of the little demo things. It's like just a real quick put together here. But it was pretty fun because I used it. I built basically a modular guitar amp in the box, and so use that as the preamp, and use another plugin of theirs, Climax, for the power amp section. Then used speaker modeling Celestion speaker thing, and so I was able to adjust the tone and all that kind of stuff all the way through, but used it on the bass and the guitars, and even for some EQing and saturation for the drums. But it was pretty fun. That's what I've been working on. Then I sent them off a bunch of presets for their next update. But I'm looking forward to tomorrow because I'm getting kind of tired. I need a day off.
Yeah.
So the presets that you're sending them, are those based on your idea of using it a little differently? Not as a straightforward filter?
Yeah, some of them are pretty conventional, like some stuff for kind of a funk, like envelope filtered bass guitar, or in the left channel you could hear the guitar that had the envelope filter on it there, and so it was just sweeping like a resonant low pass filter on, or no, it was a band pass mixed with the dry on that left guitar part. But yeah, the lead guitar part, the drive and saturation, that kind of stuff. And so so a lot of the plugins were based around guitar, and then a few for synth and drums, and some bass ones too, because it works really well on bass guitar for saturation. I kind of showed it with a really cheap what's it called, Surrealistic by Cherry Audio. It's like, well, here's how you can take something, it's a free synth, it's not the greatest sound in the world, but you can kind of make it fuller and fatter in the box, and to kind of give it a little more realism. So yeah, that's basically it. Well, welcome everybody. Glad to see everybody in the chat, all our friends, and looking forward to a good discussion tonight. Know that some of you guys have some good opinions on vintage versus modern synthesizers, and we'll begin into that in just a few moments. But let's see here. Let me get this ready. We thought we might talk about a little something up front. So Spectrasonics that make Omnisphere. Let's see how many things I can do at the same time here. Let's see. Share screen. Spectrasonics have come up with an update for Omnisphere that kind of gives you basically a built-in recorder to it. Let me see if I can find here a little bit of this here.
How many steps it can take just to record an idea. You have to set up your DAW, you got to set up your interface, you have to deal with updates and compatibility, connectivity, et cetera, And I find that by the time it's all finally working, you can easily lose that idea, especially when you're in the zone and in that kind of special flow state, creative headspace. And this is something that has bugged me for a long time. And so I asked our team to make a special new recording feature in our standalone apps for Omnisphere, Keyscape, and Trillion to address this, and it's called Flow Capture. It's incredibly useful, and it's really simple to use. I'm going to show you this. Check this out. All I have to do to capture what I just did is to just stop the recording and hit enter.
So it goes on for quite a bit longer there, but essentially within each of their programs there, you can just quickly record something in, and very cleverly gives you a different formats, different audio formats, plus MIDI, and then you can drag that into your DAW, and he goes through how all that happens. So I know Marshall and I are big Omnisphere fans, and I was wondering what you guys thought of this and this implementation of it.
It's kind of, I mean, it's only in the standalone version. So just so people are aware, like if you load up the Omnisphere VST in your DAW, it's not going to have that, from what I understand. So this is for when you're just noodling around on Omnisphere by itself. And in that regard, like I totally see, like, I guess why they've added this. But at the same time, like the only time I use Omnisphere is when I'm in my DAW, like working on stuff. So, I mean, it's probably not something that I'll really ever use. But I think that's kind of, they do kind of weird stuff like that sometimes. Like the update that they did where they started adding like the different synths, and you can like the actual hardware synths, and you can control Omnisphere from those synths, and it's supposed to kind of emulate the synth that you're connecting it to, if that makes sense. That was kind of a cool thing, but it was kind of not, I don't know how to explain that. It's not something that I would really use either. I tested it out, and I was like, yeah, this is kind of neat and everything, but like I probably will never use this either. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm wondering if it, like when they'll push out Omnisphere 3, because it seems like it's been a long time.
Yeah. And Aaron, I know like this is just catching you right now, but was curious if you had any thoughts on it.
Yeah, the record feature being exclusive to the standalone version makes sense, because as Marshall says, if you're using it as a plugin, you have your DAW there, and that's what the DAW is for, is recording and arranging. Well, from my perspective. But I could see it being a nice feature to have, like say if you're traveling, if you're away from the studio and all you have is a laptop and you're not brave enough to take your full studio installation when you are away from home. Like I've in the past had minimal installations on laptops or something, just if I'm traveling to mess around with. This is pretty handy to say, okay, you're in an airport or a hotel or something, you're just killing time. Assuming you have some way to play something, which that's a little iffy. I don't know. Now I think my argument just fell apart because I'm like, well, why are you going to have a keyboard with you when you're away from the studio anyway? So, I don't know.
It's kind of a weird thing to add, but at the same time, like I'm sure somebody's going to get some use out of it. Just
I mean, and it makes sense to have like a little MIDI capture feature. You know, that's always pretty handy.
And Wagyu's saying here that I guess on one of the other shows, somebody had mentioned it might be better if it just records all the time, like in the background. You hit the button when you want to get what you've just done, I guess.
That was almost the impression I had, is that's what he did. Is that not what he did in the video?
No, you have to actually arm it. You have to actually go in and tell it with the flow control button.
Yeah, because I know one of the recent Cubase updates include something called Retrospective Recording, which may be another DAWs under another name, but it basically, and I don't know how far back it goes, but you're supposed to be able to capture what you've done recently as far as MIDI goes.
Yeah, Ableton does that. I think it's just with MIDI also. It might do it with audio, but I don't know. Again,
that would balloon in resource management if it was audio.
Yeah.
Basically it'll be like having a memory leak on purpose, I guess.
So, and it is kind of cool because the way they do it is when you record your section, it does spit out the MIDI, the patch, and the wave file, audio file. So you kind of have
Spectrasonics does that.
Yeah, on the flow control there. So, it's. I mean, I think it could be useful, but at the same time, for a product that is in the computer anyway, I mean, it's kind of weird.
Maybe for people who, because our perspective, at least certainly you and myself and Marshall, is we're like in the studio and we're doing everything from start to finish. We're not players, we're not mixers, we're doing everything. But maybe if you were in a different environment where you have somebody who's exclusively a player, it might be handy for them at their house to have something like this, or even in the studio because they don't want to mess with the DAW, but they can still mess with Spectrasonics and they're just playing around and they want to capture a few things and then share those ideas later with somebody else. That makes a little sense. So they don't have to deal with the DAW at all.
Yeah, and I think like if you were using Omnisphere as a standalone instrument, let's say you're part of a band and that's kind of your thing, and maybe you don't have a super powerful computer or whatever, and you just want to use it in standalone mode, and you say you go to a show or go to practice, like you can kind of record your session, I guess, that way too, and go back and work on it in the DAW. So there's some applications for it. Yeah.
I love Omnisphere. It's a fantastic soft synth. It's one of the soft synths that I use the most. And I guess it's not surprising that they had put something in there like this. And I do think that it's implemented really well. Like all the features they gave it, where it exports the patch and the WAV file if you want, or especially for the MIDI. And I guess like Paul is saying, if you have collaborators, you can pass that stuff around pretty easily. What kind of struck me as funny was some of the arguments being made for it, or the the reasons given, like this is great and you don't have to set up all this other stuff that takes a long time and you're monkeying around with things, and it became really like a lot of drama. And I'm thinking, okay, just in my mind comparing the two workflows here, it's like, okay, I pull up Keyscape and I'm playing around and doing my thing, and then I want to record something. And then if I really want to do something with that, I've got to open my DAW and do a whole bunch of other stuff and drag it over. Versus, my current workflow, which would be, I sit down here, I got 4 cables that get plugged into my laptop, 2 switches, and then I load up Logic, and I have a template already to go. So if I'm just gonna screw around, I'm tired out, I don't want to write a song or anything, I'm just gonna have fun and play a little bit and mess with things. Well, then I have all the synthesizers and drums and all the resources that I have at my disposal, and the startup time can't be more than, from going in the setup that they would suggest, like, well, I've got a MIDI controller that I plug in and my power and stuff, so maybe half the things that would normally get plugged in, or 3 of the 4 anyway, and I wouldn't necessarily have to put my interface on or whatever, but get that stuff plugged in and load up Omnisphere, compared to doing the full thing where I just load up my template for my DAW that has Omnisphere already on a channel. It's like the difference in time and monkeying around that takes is 1 extra cable and maybe 20 seconds more to do it.
Yeah.
And plus I have everything ready to go, so I don't have to export or do any of that dragging around. It's just already there in my DAW. I just hit record in it and I'm ready to go. So it kind of seemed like, what's that?
It's kind of like when right before the show we we're kind of talking with Aaron. Aaron used to do a lot of work in the box, right? So like the time saver would be if something like that was on an actual hardware instrument that you had to physically plug in. But since it's a plug-in itself, it's not really that complicated to launch your DAW and put an instance of Omnisphere on there and it works.
Yeah.
So it's not
just kind of like what I said in the group. I felt like this is a very elegant solution to a problem that I don't have.
I mean, if they turn Omnisphere into an actual hardware synth, which
Yeah.
would be cool if they did
Yeah.
that, I think, then that feature definitely has a little bit more practical utility, I think, for a lot of people that way. Then you don't have to plug it in if you're just messing around and you come up with something cool. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
since it's software, it's not really a time saving. I don't see that as a real obstacle for people that are using Omnisphere. You know?
Yeah. I think, going back to some of the stuff that you said, Marshall, it kind of strikes me the same way in that we're big fans of it, and I use it. It sounds great, all of that. It's been really well designed with Eric Persing behind it. It's just amazing. But like some of their updates and stuff are kind of funny to me. Like I don't really get it, that whole hardware thing. I was trying to, and there were people complaining like, hey, when are you going to get the Moog 1 template done for it? And I'm like, why would you want to wear out the pots on your expensive synthesizer running a soft synth?
The soft synth, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, in some ways, it's like, I kind of like the idea that the software has templates for some hardware stuff. But what would be even more useful is if it had templates for actual MIDI controllers, because that's the biggest pain when using a soft synth and you got a MIDI controller. You have to manually map all your stuff. So, I mean, if they made templates for MIDI controllers, that would be a lot more convenient and useful for, at least for me, anyway.
Yeah. Well, interesting. I kind of agree. Like some of these updates, those expansion packs and stuff, were not interesting to me at all, especially for the price. And I kind of would just rather see a big update to Omnisphere, and especially like the GUI of it. I mean, there's nothing that's like horribly wrong. It just kind of needs to be updated and refreshed. There might be some things that they could make the workflow a little bit faster.
Well, it's kind of an ugly interface.
Yeah.
Omnisphere. It's not the most pretty thing to look at, but everything's in there.
Given the scope of Omnisphere, I think that might always be a difficult challenge.
Sure.
To make it user friendly and clean looking. Not that I use it, but I mean, it can do everything under the sun, basically.
They could do like a simple version and then like an advanced version. I think that
Omnisphere Lite. There you go.
Well, what I mean is like, I think it might actually even have this. I'd have to pull it up and look at it, but like something where if you didn't want to dig into every single modulation possibility and all this kind of stuff, they could do kind of a simplified stream workflow, I guess, for the UI for that, and then have an advanced one that you can kind of switch to or whatever.
Yeah, Logic's had that for quite a while. The concept of like, you want the advanced version where you can tweak it all and see more stuff, or do you want the more user-friendly simplified version where you can't screw it up as bad and there's not as many options?
Yeah.
I think, with it being and having so many things available within the engines and things that you can do, that it does kind of require, some tabbing and pages of, you're not going to be able to see everything at once unless it's going to be very small. So I'm not minding that so much, but the design of it looks very old now. And like when you pull up the effects rack in it, it's like, geez, this looks like it's 15 years old.
Yeah, it looks like it reminds me of the Access Virus plugin, TI plugin. It's kind of similar in how it's laid out in some ways. I get that kind of vibe, and they're about the same age probably. So,
yeah, I imagine they're dealing with the same thing that every software company deals with is, okay, how do we justify a new release this year? Let's go down the list of things that people would like to see and, either pick the ones that they want to see the most or pick the ones that we feel the best about implementing. And somehow this fancy little record feature made it on that list, but the overhauling various UI elements haven't made it on the list. But, people have to make decisions, and
and that may be a long-term ongoing project that they're already working on. We don't get to see behind the curtain on
overhauling the UI of Omnisphere.
Yeah. Well, Omnisphere 3 is like GTA 6. It's like taken like 100 years to come out.
Do you have a leak of the current build of Omnisphere 3? Is that what you're saying, Marshall?
No, I wish that'd be cool. But since that was in the news recently with Rockstar, I guess their GTA 6 got leaked.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, this is one of those things because everyone's been asking for it for a long time, and it's still not out. So
On the UI on Omnisphere, either one of you probably know, is it vector graphics now to where it can scale kind of infinitely, or if you make it, or can you make it bigger but then it gets pixelated as far as the UI itself? Does it scale
on Omnisphere?
Yeah, does it scale up and down?
It does
and look
scale.
clean?
Yeah, the thing for me, anyways. I've only had to scale it down because I use it on that Miko, and it's got like the GPU I threw in that thing is like garbage. It does. I don't even think it can do 1080. So I'm running at a super low resolution on that screen, and I have to actually shrink Omnisphere down so I can see it all. So even the default is pretty good resolution, but it does have the option to scale it up or down. Yeah.
Because I know converting it to where the UI is fixed assets versus assets that are kind of drawn in real time, that's a pretty substantial conversion that a lot of people have been doing over the last 5 or 10 years. That's why you use an old plugin and it's like stuck at this little size. Like all the Sound Toys plugins are still so small that you can barely read them on a proper high-res monitor because they'd have to just totally overhaul all those assets and go
And that's
come at
why
them in a
Korg
different way.
actually redid their legacy collection because of that problem.
Yeah, I'm guessing
Yeah.
that was
And
part of it.
Two other companies that have been really struggling in the graphics department have been Waves and Native Instruments, and you're talking like two of the biggest software, plugin manufacturers. And I mean, the last time, I don't use many Waves plugins, but the last update I think they did, I didn't upgrade them or anything. Like now with high resolution stuff, they made the value lines high resolution. The whole plugin itself is still looks like crap. And then, Native Instruments, I guess the Complete 14 is coming out soon and Contact 7, but a lot of complaints, like there's just no updating at all. I guess they're maybe the Contact player, the housing of it is getting an update in terms of it being able to have higher resolution graphics, but they've just not solved a lot of the issues that they were having. So I don't know. It's like you've been at it for a long time. I don't know how long. I mean, if they're on 14, I don't even know when that whole thing started, but it's been a long damn time, maybe 2 decades that, they've had plenty of time to catch up. That it's interesting to see these giants get kind of stuck and move really slowly. And yet we see other plugin manufacturers that, are 3 people and everything's updated ready. Here's for your M1 computers. Here's the high-res graphics, everything ready to go. Company with a lot of resources, not doing anything.
Yeah, and it's interesting why they would take so long to fix something as fundamental as the UI scaling, right?
Yeah.
But
I would guess it's the big ship phenomenon where it takes a long time to get that ship to move or to speed up or slow down, and whatever you do now isn't going to manifest until a month or 2 later or whatever.
when they make so many different plugins too, I can imagine it's probably quite a challenge to go back and redo everything like that.
And they got their hardware department and the integration with all that stuff.
Yeah, and then whatever they're focused on for new stuff that's coming out or that they're working on, so it's probably, I mean, they probably could do it, but they'd have to divert resources, and they probably, obviously they're just trying to get as much out of it before they actually have to do that. But if people complain enough,
focus on hardware.
Yeah, but I mean, if people complain enough, I'm sure they'll come around to doing it, hopefully sooner than later.
Yeah, all these companies got to address it at some point with modern resolution, and or else there is going to come a point. I guess people are still buying it anyways.
Yeah,
right now, so they're not forced to do it. But I think with like Native Instruments, they've lost a lot of their perhaps their original programmers. And so, to kind of get back to that code. Another one that's really suffered with this too has been the Lexicon plugins. I was looking at those for quite a while and really interested because I love Lexicon reverb. I mean, who doesn't love Lexicon reverb? But, you get a GUI that's like, what, I don't know, 15 years old or something, and it hasn't been updated much, and you still have to use the iLock dongle to use the Lexicon reverbs, and just hardly any updates, very minimal at most. And it kind of leaves you wondering, like, what's going on? Because these are classic sounds, but, at least there are other companies, I mean, they're kind of rising up to take that area of sound over. So like Relab and Valhalla and plenty of other companies that are doing the classic Lexicon sounds, that Lexicon itself is just going to get passed up.
Yeah, and Valhalla did the right thing, and they have a very simple UI for a lot of their stuff, and it's vector graphics, so they scale perfectly, So that's one of the benefits, though, of kind of coming in a little later to the game with some of that stuff, though, too. You can make those choices.
Build it from the ground up.
From the ground up at the beginning, yeah.
Yeah, well, it seems like some of these companies are a little bit smaller, or also have a little more heart into what they're doing. And so somebody like Sean Costello at Valhalla, or a number of these, small companies, Yuhi, Pulsar Modular, all these little tiny companies they're doing stuff, like they actually really care about their stuff, and they're concerned that their product isn't going to be what they want it to be. Whereas I feel like some of the bigger companies are like, as long as money's coming in, we can just do the bare minimum. Native Instruments will just keep putting out sample packs, but they won't invest into the architecture of their software. I mean,
yeah. I don't know. This is going to be a weird thing. Like eventually, if some of these companies, either they die out, or, and then you're going to have these ancient plugins that don't get updates anyway, because the company's either not around, or like Absinthe, right? That thing just got kicked to the curb. So people that love Absinthe are just stuck with whatever that last one is. And if they want to keep using it, they're going to eventually have to maintain older hardware to use it.
Yeah. And well, look who's going to fill that space. Is it going to be Native Instruments going to come out with something new to replace Absinthe? I don't know, but Brian Clevenger, the designer who's at Rhizomatic, he says he's interested in doing something. So
yeah,
they'll maybe even lose out on that. And the good news is that, again, it'll be somebody who's passionate and that cares about the product. He had mentioned that he would have updated it and spent a lot of time working on it if they would have just hired him to do that. I mean, that'd have been nothing for them to come in and say, hey, we want to get you to work on this again.
Yeah. Plugins, man, they got their own set of issues, don't they?
Yeah. But I mean, like, hey, there can be a lot of complaints for these companies that don't really take care of stuff, but in the long run, like, I'm very grateful for all the plugins we have, because we have access to so many sounds, and for just a fraction of the price of what hardware would cost. All of my Valhalla plugins, I think I have all of theirs except for Plate, and I just haven't gotten around to doing it. But that would cost me a fraction of what a Lexicon rack would cost of similar quality. I mean, not the budget stuff, but so it's good.
I like Dreadbox Absinthe. That'd be cool.
Well, Dreadbox is contracted with Sign Vibes, and Sign Vibes has been doing a lot of their effects and software stuff. So
cool.
Pretty cool. Well, vintage and modern synthesizers. Where do we even begin with this?
I don't know. I think we should start with asking each of us, what's the most vintage synth you've ever owned?
Start us off, Aaron.
All right. That's where I'd started too. Surprisingly, the most vintage synth I've ever owned would be the MS-2000R Korg digital synthesizer, the rack version. The unit
Not
that I
the B,
had,
right? Not the
What's-
B, the
what's
actual,
that?
not the B version, right?
Well, it didn't say B on the chassis. I think it was
Yeah,
the original
that's the
MS-2000R.
original. Yep.
Yeah. Blue. I bought it off Reverb. I just wanted to try it out, I guess. And I really like the sound of it, where I've heard it. And that's probably the primary source of my own experience of vintage versus, and I don't even know if you can call it vintage. To me, vintage has got to be at least from the 80s. I mean that, because I was born in the 80s, so if it's not from the 80s, it's not vintage.
Not vintage.
But
Even so, that thing's like 22, 21. I think the MS-2000 came out in the year 2000.
yeah, I assume it's from around the year 2000. But that introduced me to the possible issues you can have with vintage, where I got this thing and it was advertised as working, and it did in fact work well, but the glue there's on the MS-2000, there's a row of buttons along the bottom. They're clickety buttons for like picking different patches and doing all sorts of parameters. And there was glue inside the chassis with these buttons, and that glue had kind of turned to, I thought somebody had spilled soda pop on it when I first got it, because all the glue, I don't know enough about glue, but it had like turned into a kind of a film, like the sticky film inside there. So I had to take it all apart, use a Q-tip to clean all that gunk out of there. And there was plenty of animal hair in there. Once it was all clean, yeah. Once it was all cleaned up enough that I felt comfortable using it and it would, function, I really had no issues with it after there. That just lets me know, okay, if I'm going to buy something vintage off of a website, there might be some things like that happening. Whereas if you bought vintage in person, you could look at it and touch it and, smell it and whatever else you're going to do.
Yeah. I don't know if
that's my vintage experience. What was that, Marshall?
I don't know if you'll spot the animal hair though, even in person.
Oh, I would. I'm meticulously clean freak, anal, whatever you want to call it. That's me. I'd be like, pull out the white glove and
Get the
no soup for you.
no soup for you. It fails. What about you, Chris?
Well, let's see, for synthesizer. Well, with guitar equipment, I've had a ton of vintage stuff. I mean, more than I can count. I went through like quite a bit of vintage amps and pedals. I mean, many hundreds of vintage pedals, and would fix up like old Fender amps from the 60s. And I've I know this is a little side, but I've got an amp from 65, guitar from 65. Got some other, another amp that's probably from 63 or so, or 64, and a lap steel from 1955. And but with synthesizers, I don't have stuff that goes back that terribly far. I've had a couple Juno 106s, and definitely my oldest synth would be 1970, early 74 ARP 2600.
Yeah,
that'd be the oldest set I've got.
That's vintage enough even for Aaron.
Yeah.
That's legit.
Yeah.
But finding stuff, yeah, totally agree with Aaron. Like, man, there's gotten stuff in the mail off of eBay or Reverb that just been like disgusting. And back in the 90s, like vintage pedals were not too expensive, and there are places that would have just tons and tons of them, and we could actually go and play them and trade stuff and buy and whatnot, and then with our friends. But we've took apart, one of my buddies and I took apart an old Electro Harmonix Electric Mistress. I'm sure I've told the story, but So it's a flanger from the late 70s, and we popped open the back to see what was wrong in it, and there was still a little baggie full of pot in there.
That's what I was going to guess.
It looked pretty old, but it's like, coming out of an Electro-Harmonix pedal, we weren't too surprised about that. Got to hide it
That's
somewhere,
for the
I
full
guess.
experience. It's like you got to smoke the pot and use the pedal to get the full experience. Which I think that's a fantastic idea, and that the marketing departments all over the world should run with that idea, with synths, pedals, all that stuff. It's like, well, we have this thing's laced with LSD, so when you use it, you get the full experience.
Yeah.
There's a little lick here, circle or somewhere on the synth.
Here, phase shifting like you've never heard
Like,
it before.
Sounds
Right.
best at room temperature with no gloves on, whatever.
You'll lose your mind when you use it, literally.
Have to put a seatbelt on to use the synthesizer first. Sorry, I sidetracked you.
How about you, Marshall?
Yeah. So I like, if I go
DX7.
Oh, I had a DX7. I smashed it, literally. But anyway, so the oldest one I currently own is a JD800, and just like Aaron's kind of talking about with the glue, that one particularly has a notorious glue issue with the key bed, the red glue issue. That actually happened to mine after I've had it for like 7 or 8 years. It happened when I moved to humid Florida, and did have to go through and do some surgery on that guy, but I got it working, got it all fixed up. But yeah, that's the oldest one I have. I did the oldest one I've ever bought though is probably that DX7, and I hate it. I hate that thing.
So
Anyway.
it was done out of hate and not as a sacrifice to the industrial gods.
No, well, see, I thought I remember watching the show from Sonic State that they did like years ago called the Top 20 Greatest Synths Ever or something. It was kind of a cheeky top 20 countdown that they did like weekly, and this was like early, like 2006 or 7, right when I was kind of getting into the hardware stuff. And I remember seeing on that show an interview from one of the guys from The Cure, and he was just mad dogging the DX7 like crazy. And I was like, yeah, I guess nobody likes that thing. And so, I knew it had pedigree, right? It'd been all kind of 80s stuff and everything. Mm-hmm. So I ended up getting one to try it out, and it's awful, just like I thought. It's a program, that is. It sounds good. I like the Sound FM I've always liked, right?
Yeah.
That's a Yamaha, and they don't make good interfaces on anything, I don't think. So I thought I was going to be cute, right, and make this whole video about how I hate it and everything. And I bought one, I bought a nice working one from a guy locally, and then I went online and I bought a broken one, and I smashed the broken one. So there were no working DX7s killed in that video, but it just got dislike bombed like crazy. So I was like, oh, whoops. I thought the Cure guy spoke for everyone. A lot of people love that thing. I don't know why. I mean, that's awful to use.
Yeah.
But it's built like a tank. I mean, I smashed it with a hammer, and it was, I broke the PCB, but the chassis was perfectly fine, I
think I avoided all the DX7 and, horrible interface, and went for the Kodomo Essence FM. And I got to tell you, it's fantastic to use. It's really easy to program from having a big touch screen.
So there you go. I mean, that's one of the cool things about some of the modern stuff that you can do now. Yeah. Obviously, they didn't have touch screens in the 80s, so that would have been impossible. And they didn't have computers that could do stuff like Absinthe or the one I like, the FM application I like on the computer is Citrus. It's actually by FL Studio. And I think it comes packaged with Fruity Loops or whatever, but you can buy some of their plugins like that standalone. And there was a guy, I think he still does tutorials on YouTube, called Seamless. And he loved that thing. And I learned a lot about FM synthesis from him. And the way that interface is designed is like exactly how you need a good interface for FM. And it's just a bunch of knobs and a matrix. And you turn them up, and That's how you get your FM, and it's pretty cool. So you can't do that on a DX7 with one slider. So
Yeah, let's go. Well, let's go back to something that was brought up with reliability and repair. I mean, so you guys mentioned a little bit about your experience with vintage synthesizers, the JD800 red glue problem that's kind of infamous. I had to deal with some Roland problems myself. The Juno 106 is my first 106 was working fine, and that was, gosh, probably about 20 years ago. And so I, didn't even know that there would be coming a problem with it. So that worked fine until the point that I sold it and never had any issues. And my second one, I looked out and I got one that had the chips. So with the voice, the little voice cards were encased in some sort of whatever it is, epoxy or whatever, to I don't know for what reason it was done, but after time it became conductive and it messes with your voices, and they end up failing until you either replace the cards or you go through this really intense process of removing all the crap from it. So I found somebody that had done all that and had removed all the crap off of them, so they work great. And then what I ended up having to do, because when I got it, like, the guy hadn't calibrated it. So, 1985 106, and it hadn't been calibrated since 1985. So I was noticing that when I started, I was so excited to get it. I was like, man, my first synth was a 106, and now I'm finally getting another one and excited to play with it. And it sounded good, but then I was noticing that certain things were off, especially like with the filter tracking was what set me down a course, because I was like, man, I can't track it. I know that I should be able to track the filter and play the filter, and I was having some issues with it being out of tune for those kind of patches, get some kind of bell type sounds. But I opened it up and I started looking into, the one thing that's nice, at least, to have a vintage synth in a modern era is that the resources are wonderful, because I immediately was able to find not just the manual, but the service manual for it, which is just a whole nother thing, circuit diagrams, how you calibrate. So I just got a little oscilloscope and my multimeter and, started setting stuff up and going through and checking, like, tuning it. I went through and retuned the filters. It was a long damn process. It took forever to go through and do it, because you would go through and then you would have to start the process again and just kind of get it closer and closer. But that was on 106 that already had the voice cards done. So, a lot of the work was, at least as far as the cards were done, because that's a mess and I wouldn't want to deal with that. But now I'm, of course, dealing with a 2600, which is one of the most amazing sounding synthesizers in existence. And, of course, they really cheaped out on the inside. It's kind of nuts to work on. It's not a fun thing to work on. And right away, the first thing, it's like, well, I got to replace the electrolytics, I redid the power supply, started working on the boards, and it's just filled with tantalum capacitors, which go bad, and which is what's gone bad in mine. So that's a very long process that I've put on hold, but that's, it was an opportunity to get a classic synthesizer, and that I wouldn't be able to pay cash for, because they're way too expensive. But there's a lot of stuff to be done on it.
yeah, so again, like, kind of a strike, especially against analog vintage, is availability of components. Mm-hmm. You've got places like Centaur where you can get some stuff, and I'm sure there's probably some other places that you can get some vintage parts for these old synths. But you doing the repair yourself at least we have the internet, right? But even if you sent it to somebody who's a professional, it may take them months to get everything they need to fix it too, so that is definitely that's probably the primary reason why I have not bought analog vintage.
Yeah.
Well, I say that, but like this on Andromeda A6 is 20 something years old too now. So, I mean, it's getting to the point where it's starting to get pretty old, you know? So even the stuff that's modern now eventually will get old, you know?
Yeah, well, I remember watching. There was a studio tour from Junkie XL, the composer, and I'm sure probably most people are familiar with him. But just a crazy multi-room studio, like a whole entire wall of Moog modular, and then
Yeah.
racks of digital synthesizers, and then he's like walking around showing off everything. It's like, oh, here's a whatever CS60, and here's the CS40M, or whatever they were, and going through. And it's like, yeah, well, I would like to show you this other one, but these three of them are in the shop right now, and there's always something. There's always multiple synthesizers in the shop because they're just stuff goes wrong, and
They're old.
yeah, and there's a lot of circuitry too. I mean, I've been working on guitar amps forever, but the amount of circuitry in a guitar amp. Now the guitar amps, there's a lot more heat to deal with, and some of them go back well before synthesizers, so there's some really old stuff out there. But with some of the vintage stuff, it's like it's not that bad to work on, especially if they're using turret or point-to-point wired boards and things like that, and it's not that bad. But opening up something that we would think is fairly simple, like a Juno 106, like 6-voice DCO, oh, no big deal. That still has a lot of circuitry in it.
But it's big. I just, the stuff that's coming out now, I've bought like almost every major modern reissue of vintage.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like the Mini Moog and the Oberheim and the Prophet 10. A lot of that surface mount components now. I don't think the Mini Moog is. I think that's all through hole components.
Yeah.
But I know that the Prophet 10 is. And I don't know if that's easier to fix. I mean, it may be easier to get parts for that. So at least, for who knows how long, but like into the future when that thing becomes vintage, right? It might be easier to get parts, but like that thing is so tiny. I don't know if you can even work on it yourself,
Well, going to the surface mount, I think it's not that it can't be worked on, because it absolutely can. It is a little bit smaller and a little more fidgety to get to work with those components. I think one of the big hang-ups is that a lot of us, grew up fixing standard size components, through hole boards or point-to-point wired amps, and things like that. And so we're used to working like that. I don't have the skill set to work on a surface mount design. I mean, I could have done the Prophet capacitor mod, whatever happened when they first started shipping the new Prophet 5s and 10s.
Yeah.
Yeah, remove some of that. That's not that hard. That can do that. But then when you start getting into replacing multiple components or op amps and things like that, like, man, I don't think I would want to even try to tackle that. And again, it's just a skill set you could learn. I could probably go online and learn it, but I don't at this point, I don't really care, and I don't want to.
It's like doing like surgery, but like through a mailbox, it's so tiny. Like, I don't know. I watch some guys on YouTube that do these electronics repairs, and they fix modern stuff, usually like, I don't know, radios or just whatever, right? Xboxes. And that's all surface mount stuff too. And I'm just like, I don't know, man. Like you're looking at this little tiny thing through a magnification microscope thing, and if you move your hand, like you're just, I don't know. Like, I don't think I could do that either.
Yeah, I mean, even like the Juno or the ARP and stuff, from component size, it's not bad at all. I mean, whatever, like quarter-watt resistors or something, like that's not bad to deal with. But yeah, like you need pop that up already. Those, you do need the right tools. That stuff gets very tiny. It's getting a little bit more difficult to see that stuff for me.
Yeah.
To me, that's the crux of the argument is, do I want to spend time making music or do I want to spend time repairing synthesizers and maintaining synthesizers, which that leans more toward the collector mindset versus the musician producer mindset where, well, I just need tools that work. And when these tools stop working, I'll get different tools that do work rather than investing the time and the money to build a workstation, repair a repair desk like Marcus Fuller, where my impression is if any synth came in there, he could figure out what's wrong with it and order the parts and fix it himself if he had to. But you know, I'm nowhere near. I could develop the skill to do that, and you know, but it's like, well, I'm not interested in doing that. I'm just interested in making music with a vintage aesthetic to it, which to me that segues to the next part of the conversation, which is, at least for me anyway, is like, I love the vintage sound, but I don't want the vintage experience. How do I get there? And thankfully, these days we're kind of in a emergence where people are pursuing vintage sounds, so we're able to get new equipment that sounds like old equipment or is inspired by old equipment. So we're not stuck in where maybe 10 years ago you're like, well, you can have a good sound or you know, you can have a vintage sound with vintage stuff or a new sound with new stuff, but you can't have a vintage sound with new stuff.
Right.
And you guys might know better than I am. You know, at what point were you able to get new stuff with a vintage sound? Was that the Prophet 6 and the OB6?
It's a good question. Let me think about that for a second.
Or the Model D reissue or something like that.
The Model D issue was a big one, but I think they had kind of that was like 2015 or 16 they came out with that.
And that would have been about the same time as the Prophet 6, and then I think a year later the OB6 or so.
Yeah.
So
I mean, but they had the MS-20 Mini. I don't remember when that came out. That's been around for a while.
Yeah, either 2013 or 2015, I think.
Yeah, let's see. I'll try and look it up.
Just to recap, the what we were trying to figure out was when did the current batch of like reissues of the classic analog synthesizers, when was it that we were able to get that sound out of a modern synthesizer again? And so,
they don't have to be reissues. I guess another way to put it is, when did modern manufacturers try to capture a vintage sound in modern equipment?
If we're talking
rather than moving forward and away from the vintage sound, which they did for decades.
I mean, you've had companies like Studio Electronics who've been putting together boom boxes, or what do they call them? Boomstars?
Boomstar,
yeah. They've always been there. Like they started in the analog peak and they never left.
Right. And they were doing mini Moog conversions for a long time as well. So, I mean, I'd say I guess technically, since they've been around for a long time doing stuff like that, it's probably always been there. But the Studio Electronics wasn't a company I even really heard of until Roland did the SEO2.
Yeah, they're a boutique, and I don't think they're indicative sample of the larger flow of things.
Yeah, but major companies, I don't. Other than Roland doing the software stuff for a long time, or trying to stuff like D50 sounds into a V-synth and stuff like that. Like, I can't really think of anything.
I mean, the Andromeda would have been like a return to analog design, but not necessarily a vintage design. It would have been a modern design inspired.
It was that was actually one of the first fully analog. Well, I think it's got effects on it that are digital, but in terms of the actual oscillators and filters and everything being all analog, I want to say that was like the first one to come out in decades.
So Paul says Buchla, and the one I just thought of would have been the Moog Voyager.
Yeah, but that Voyager doesn't really sound like. I mean, it sounds different than a Mini Moog.
Yeah,
Well,
but
I
It
it
could
could
be
have been a
analog, but it could be a forward-looking analog
Yeah.
rather than a
Yeah.
backward-looking analog.
And that's what as I was just gonna basically say that too. Yeah, like a modern version of the Mini Moog is what they were trying to do with that.
Yeah, so Wagyu says that Elisa's philosophy with the Andromeda, though, was definitely an attempt to capture the best of the classics.
Yeah.
And I think that we would have to kind of look at, you know, the Mini Moog would probably be one of the first like actual reissues. But if we're looking at modern analog designs that are definitely looking back at the classics while trying to move forward, then you start thinking about things like the Andromeda and the Voyager, and then the Dave Smith stuff.
Yeah.
That's been out for quite a while.
I'm glad that they've been doing it though. Honestly, because growing up listening to all this music that's been made with those instruments and always kind of like wanting to have the ability to either work with that equipment or just to be able to do stuff with instruments that some of my heroes used, that's always been extremely appealing to me. So
But not have to find a vintage Prophet 5 to do
yeah,
it.
for ridiculous amounts of money and
Yeah.
having a hard time getting it fixed if it breaks, and that's why I'm super glad to see reissues coming out, like actual analog Roland.
One of the other nice things about even reissues, if they're done well, is that they can kind of build on and maybe even correct some of the shortcomings of the original. And so, correct me if I'm wrong, though, but the Mini Moog reissue has an extra LFO, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, it's got an extra LFO. It's got MIDI. It's got it you can overdrive the filter without having to plug the cable in. You used to have to plug the cable in.
Yeah, it just has a routing internally in it.
It's done it internally, yeah. And it's got some other modes that you can do by holding down certain keys when you power the unit on, like low note priority. You can change stuff like that.
Well, that's huge, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, that doesn't sound like.
They've made it like it's the ultimate Mini Moog. Honestly,
Yeah.
It's they did everything right.
I wish I had a Mini Moog reissue, and I wish I would have spent the money before they went nuts. But so the closest that I have is the Behringer Model D, and I love it. It sounds great, and it has again some of those extra features. Again, like a switch for the feedback loop, or it's got an extra LFO. It's got you can switch the filter into high pass mode. Just these things that make it like they're small things, but they make it so much better than the feature set of the original. And now when I'm checking out like Mini Moog soft synthesizers, so we just had the update for the actual Moog Mini Moog soft synth, which was only available on iOS, but now can be run on Mac OS, and I can run it right in Logic. And I'm going to do things on there that I can do on the Behringer. I'm like, oh, it doesn't have that. Because the original didn't have that feature. And I'm like, man, I got to use, or, for whatever one it is, Softtube or Arturia, whatever. If they don't have, some of them will give you all the features. Other ones where you're like, oh, I got to use oscillator 3 for my LFO now. Damn, because I wanted to do like a 3 oscillator patch and then also be able to have some vibrato on the mod wheel, but I can't do that.
Yeah. So, but there are times when you see like a reissue and it's not done so great. Well, I guess in that regard, I'm kind of talking about the Boog, the Behringer Mini Moog clone.
Mm-hmm.
They put a high pass filter on that thing and it doesn't even work right. Have you tried that high pass filter on yours?
I haven't spent a lot of time with the high pass
filter. It's not even a high pass. It's the dumbest thing. It doesn't even work. So they put this on there and it doesn't even do what it's supposed to do. So stuff like that's irritating, but
well, and one of my complaints with them would be when they copy the mistakes of the original. and that's happened. And there's things like you could have just fixed that. Like that was not a feature. That was a problem. That was a limitation. Why didn't you update that? And one, a rant that I had before was that like, checking out the MS-20 stuff. I really like the Arturia plugin. This new one they came out with for the MS-20 is phenomenal. Way better than the Chord Collection one. It sounds amazing. So much that I went and started looking at MS-20 stuff. But almost everything from Korg reissues to the Behringer are all hertz per octave.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have anything vintage that has hertz per octave that I would want to hook it up to a cheap clone anyway.
Well, no, because nobody uses that.
Nobody uses that. So
Yeah.
if I got, a Behringer or a Korg MS-20, I couldn't use it easily with my rack. Now I have stuff. I have a distine that I could do the conversion on. I'm not going to do that crap. I'm just not going to buy it. It's not worth it.
It's not like that's going to change the sound of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's like a no-brainer. If it's not going to really affect the sound, and nobody, like, I don't know anybody who's like, oh yeah, hertz per octave, I need that. No.
Well, it occurs to me that perhaps at Korg there's the diehards hertz per octaves that are still convinced that hertz per octaves is the future of the format or whatever, and so they're going to stick to it. But for Behringer and anybody else cloning MS-20s, it's like just
in a way, like,
it makes sense.
In a way, I kind of like it though, because they did make it like the original. Like, it's just, I mean, you're going to get the original experience, including that defect. Well, the incompatibility of how it was made initially, right?
Yeah.
So there was no standard when it was made. So
get this. They did something that they should have done. They should have kept it going. Is Korg did a module version of the MS-20. So it didn't have the crappy ass keyboard on it. You just got the module, and the module was volts per octave. Guess which model out of all the vintage and reissue Korg models are like just through the roof on prices? It's that one.
Right, because it worked
a very limited run.
Yeah,
I tried to get one of those, but like they stopped making it shortly before, and the prices just went through the roof.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean,
was
they're
like, okay,
over
I'll just get the
$2,000, I
mini.
think.
I didn't know what I
yeah,
was
here we go. This is what happened.
Yeah,
I agree.
there you go.
That's the only explanation I can think of.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, can you imagine like people like, hey, you want to watch Star Wars? You're gonna have to watch it on Betamax.
Oh,
Or HD
Actually-
DVD. I still think HD DVD should have won the format war.
Well, yeah. I mean, as far as the format wars go, like I'm sure the right choice lost out quite a few times. But the thing is, like, once there's a standard set,
yeah.
and it, more so than with VCRs, but like with modular gear, like you want to have everything work together so that you get the most out of the stuff that you have. So like, well, I've got a matriarch and a little Euro rack, and if I had an MS-20, man, that'd be great to run the matriarch through its filter or something, or some of my Euro rack oscillators, through this part of this synth and this part of this synth. But then you start messing with the hertz versus volts scaling, and you can't do it, or it's a pain in the ass. Really, it's a pain in the ass, because then you have to buy extra stuff, take space in your rack, then you got to do all the conversion stuff, and yeah, who wants to mess with that?
no way. No way. No, thank you. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. Have you guys ever had an opportunity? I know, Chris, you had that Juno 106, and you have your 2600 that you're working on.
Mm-hmm.
But either you guys ever have an opportunity to buy anything else vintage that maybe you had an opportunity but decided against it for one reason or another?
Certainly not in my case. And I don't know that I've ever wanted to get the vintage stuff so much, but rather I hear stuff that is vintage and then trying something. Thankfully, I'm in the era where the vintage sounds are reappearing into modern formats, so I can hear something from an old song or from some recording and figure out, okay, what is that? And then figure out what's close to it, which to me, one of the primary attractions to modular is giving you so much more flexibility. Say, okay, I want to get the oscillator out of that vintage synth, and the filter out of that vintage synth, and the envelopes out of that vintage synth, and put them all in my rack, and it's the most amazing rabbit hole that you could ever go down, and it's just the most addictive experience that I've ever had in my life. But all that said, so the pursuit of the vintage gear itself hasn't allured me, but using that as inspiration and finding things is what I really like.
So so I mean, that approach is pretty cool, I think. And that's actually one of the really big strengths of modular, and especially in today's age with the Eurorack stuff. There's just so much to pick and choose from that you can literally build your own kind of custom monster, Yeah,
I like, Aaron, what you had done with that Eurorack setup that you had for a while, where you were just building out, like, what was it, like a 4-voice polysynth in Eurorack?
It's going to happen down the road. It's such an expensive endeavor. Like, okay, I got to wait till I'm in a better financial position before I go down the road again, because
yeah. But that idea, I mean, that was what I had started doing with Eurorack as well. And I remember us talking about it, and you were really excited about, like, well, you could mix. Why can't we just mix and match filters? I'm like, that's what I've been saying too. Like, and a lot of other people have already done this as well. It's just a great concept, and I think in the guitar world, that's a much more common thing, because, you have one brand of guitar, you have all these different pedals. You might run one brand of an amp head and a different brand of an amp cab, and it's, in that regard, completely modular. You move your pedals around like it's Eurorack, and you can switch stuff. But with synthesizers, oftentimes if you're kind of stuck with what you have in it, unless, again, you can break it out through modular. But of course, that's if you're going vintage modular, that's hella expensive. But at least Eurorack is, again, one of those things that have, depending on what you like. I mean, really, because some people just want to work with the Moog format, and but if you're into Eurorack, then you end up saving some money and saving space to be able to have the same kind of stuff, but in a much smaller and less expensive format, which would be another
5U. That just scares me, the idea that, now they're going to be this big and that wide, and they're going to cost 3 times as much, and you're going to need 3 times as much space. It's like horrifying to imagine.
You start thinking about patch cables after that. How much?
They all going to be quarter-inch patch cables now. I'm going to be like hunched around because they're so heavy on my neck. You're going to spend 3 times as much on patch cables too.
That's funny. More robust, though. You're not going to get those snapped off necessarily. Well, not very easily anyway. In a jack, right? I wonder how often
the 5U
that happens.
is a smaller market, though. Eurorack is pretty much, that's where all the innovation and the availability, as far as I know, is in Eurorack.
Yeah.
Because I researched the formats briefly when I was in there, before I took the plunge, and it's like, what is that? One of the big synth channels, I can't remember, Paolo, whatever, I can't remember his channel's name, but he's always giving regular updates on his 5U modular that he's slowly been building. He's his ancient channel, I think it's the biggest synth channel on YouTube, but
yeah, Synth Mania.
Yeah, Synth Mania.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a 5U that he's working on, and yeah, it's a frightening amount of money and space in that endeavor.
Oh,
Well, that guy loves synths, so I'm not surprised.
Yeah, Alex Ball's been doing that Roland modular too. That's got to be kind of crazy price too.
Like a System 100 format?
Yeah, I don't remember what system it is, but it's getting pretty big. And it sounds amazing. It really does.
Well, do you guys remember that Moog did do a reissue of the System 55? Is that what it was called?
Yeah, I think 2 of those. One is like 30 grand and the other is like, who knows?
Yeah, it was like the Keith Emerson thing, right? That's what it reminded me of anyway. But I don't know if that's what he used, but yeah, it was like 30 grand for the big one. It's like, holy crap.
Yeah, I think didn't they do the Model 15 as well?
Yeah, they did 2 of them.
Yeah. I think they did those around the same time the Mini Moog. So they were built, I think, exactly the same as the originals, like the Mini Moog, in terms of through-hole components. It's not surface mount stuff. They made it just like the original.
Yeah, that Daniel Fisher video where he's demoing the filter sweep with the delay. Yeah,
I was like, I need to be able to do that. How do I do that? You know, it's some of those aha moments. You're like, oh, I need to be able to do that. How did you do that? And then you watch the video over and over and over and finally figure it out. And then you go and blow $700.
Well, you know, I will say though that there are issues today with some of the modern stuff trying to be like vintage, and it's done. There's very curious choices that are made, and again, I'm going to pick on Roland here, but you know, like the Juno X comes out, it's got fake air vents, heat vents on the back. It's like
fake warm up sequence.
Yeah, fake warm up sequence in the X. Was that the Jupiter X and XM? They had that. It's like, what is this? Like,
they're taking cues
wasn't it
from
on those that
TikTok
they
or
would,
something. I don't know.
it would go out of tune after a while too. Like you.
oh, did it? I don't
They
know.
would digitally have it
I refuse to buy
purposely
it.
go out of tune to be like an analog.
Yeah.
With the aesthetics were beautiful, and what the System 1 line and System 8 should have been, but then they decided to just
Yeah.
go a whole different direction and abandon ACB on those. And
Yeah, it was disappointing because the ACB was actually really good.
yeah,
It's like you're taking the best of your what you can do to emulate these in digital form, and then you're gonna fake warm up. See what? What is the point of that? I don't know. Fake heat vents on the back. What? I don't get.
So
that's like a fake hood scoop, I guess.
Yeah, it's like heat extractors on a 4-cylinder Mustang. Like they don't do anything. It's stupid. Like, doesn't make it go faster. Doesn't make it sound like. It's very gimmicky, and I don't like that at all. You know, that stuff bugs me.
Yeah, here's another one. The Prophet 6 and the OB6 has an accelerometer. You can bang the side of it, and when it's on the spring reverb, which is a digital emulation,
Oh, I didn't know
and it'll
that.
crash it like a
Like a
actual
spring.
tank does.
Yeah. That's fun.
That at least is fun, and it has some sort of purpose to it, not like fake air vents or going out of tune on a digital synth.
That's like an Easter egg. Like a lot of the modern Korg analog synths, you turn them on, and there's a little game while it's loading that you can play on the screen, like a little, side scroller,
Pong.
plane
Something.
thing, or something like a Breakout or Asteroids, something
Yeah.
like that.
That's kind of neat. Hey, how long is that boot up sequence though?
I think it keeps going if you keep playing the game. I can't remember.
Oh, it'll just. Oh, that's cool.
I can't remember because I know on the
Like I came here to make some sounds. Now I'm playing this little game on here.
I think the 4-voice one is the one the what is that, the mini log? I think the mini log was certainly the one I remember that had it, but I can't remember if they did it on the other ones.
And that's a good example of a modern analog synth, the Minilog, right? And
Yeah.
the Minilog XD is even better.
I would argue with you on that one, but as far as and whatever I can't remember the name of the Japanese guy who worked for Korg and is responsible for creating that synthesizer, but that really shook things up. I think that was part of what ushered in the wave to follow, because that way he was kind of on the leading edge, and that was one of the first maybe affordable analog synthesizers.
It was polyphonic, right?
Yeah.
That's 4-voice. So the Korg was. I think we owe a lot of this resurgence to Korg because they were the ones that started coming out with those little
Volcas.
monotrons. No, even before the Volcas, they were like little battery powered little box, single oscillator. I can't remember what they're called, monotrons or something like that. But anyway, it's the technology that showed that you can make analog very inexpensively using the surface mount component stuff. And they've turned that into, all those other stuff like the Volcas and the reissue of the MS-20 Mini. And then I think that it led them to the Mini Log and all that whole product line as well. So, I mean,
The Odyssey.
yeah.
So let me
Yeah, I
ask you
forgot about
guys,
the Odyssey. I always forget about that one.
let me ask you guys, as far as modern analog synths or things that are a little bit tied to the past, what do you think are the best ones out there for you right now? I'm asking everybody in the chat too. As far as what's out on the table now, it could be a virtual analog or a monosynth, polysynth, module. What's of the new stuff that's out that would be compared to the old stuff, or it's nostalgic of the old stuff, would you guys think are the best new stuff?
I'll start then.
Go ahead.
The
Yeah,
OBX8.
I was waiting for you, Marshall.
The OBX8, and then a close second, the 2600 FS. Those are the two, yeah.
Does the Prophet sound not resonate with you, now that you've owned one for a while, to get familiar with the general tone?
No, I mean, I like the Prophet, but it's mono, and it's got, I don't know. The OB sound is definitely more appealing to me in general.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the Prophet, I've got a borrowed Prophet 10 here that it sounds, when it's doing its pad thing, it sounds lovely, but having played the OBX8, that's just a whole nother world better.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's
That's interesting.
whoa, I can't believe they made this. That's
because they're both based on, I would assume, the original circuit designs in both cases.
Yeah. And they actually are kind of just like with the Prophet reissues, they put the multiple filter options in there. Right. And they kind of did that with the OBX8, where it's just, you can switch between the OBX mode, OBXA mode, and what was the other one?
Oh, yeah, OBX, OBXA, and OB8.
OB8, that's it. Yeah.
It has
So you can't have 3 vintage synths in one instrument now. I mean, that's,
wow.
when you think about that, it's crazy. And it sounds really good. Now, I don't know, they did, Oberheim did a couple of videos comparing patches to originals. And I think it sounds pretty good. But I'd like to see somebody custom create some stuff and see how well they kind of match up. Maybe someone like Retro Sound will do something like that. Somebody who's got some of the old ones to really kind of dig into them. Because I don't, those are those types of synths. It's I've seen a picture of one, but I've never seen one or touched one in real life. So I don't really know if this really sounds like that. Seems like it does.
Well, and YouTube demos can veil certain elements that you'll only hear in person.
Yeah. And the S-Route says Retro Sound would hate it no matter what. And he probably would.
Although I'd say with, there can be some, compromise, but the compromise in audio is not as big as it used to be on YouTube. And what I find the bigger challenge is the user. And it's always some idiot that doesn't know how to compare stuff that will get it wrong. If you watch pedal demos for, whatever pedal it is, a chorus or distortion, whatever, they don't set them to sound the same. They set the knobs to the same position, but there's tolerance differences.
That doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. Or the same thing when you're doing it with synthesizers. But when I was talking to Marcus from Oberheim, he was saying we just did the circuit. We just put the circuit in there. Now it can do more stuff than the original did, but if you're looking at the design of the oscillators and stuff, it's the same. It's the same thing. It's going to sound the same. You just have more features on it. So
that's oh man, I totally just lost my train of thought. Sorry, Chris.
So I mean, there's always going to be differences in sound between units and whatnot. Like in the videos that he did, comparing it to his original OBX and OBXA. I'm like, yeah, there are little differences in sound, but they're relatively minor. And considering one's got very old components and one's got very new components, I think
Yeah.
the difference is like
Negligible. Really.
negligible between the two. If you didn't have both of them sitting there,
You wouldn't know.
it would, yeah, you wouldn't know. And if you had, you know, say this OBX8 with an original OBX, you know, transported through time from whatever 1970 whatever or 80 or whenever it came out, you know, the components haven't aged. Then if you compared them side by side, they would probably even sound a bit closer.
But I remember what I was gonna say now. I was one of those guys that did a demo comparing the Behringer Model D to the reissue, and I took screenshots of the Moog patch book for the mini Moog and set them to the numbers and compared them. And they don't sound the same, obviously, because the pots are different, right? But I was like trying to say, like, if you take this sound here, because there's no memory on this, and you try and remake this sound to the numbers, they don't sound the same.
Yeah.
Now, if you have them sitting side by side, you can tweak and dial them in. But, you know, that was kind of the point there, I guess.
Yeah. That's very true. I mean, and then also how you, when you do a comparison, if you build a patch, say if it's synthesizer, if you build a patch on one and then try to copy it on the other versus building it on the second one and trying to copy it to the first can also make a difference. And so you kind of need to have multiple tests to see, well, how is the variance in sound? And then I enjoy it when, you know, like I said, I've seen a whole bunch of people do things bad, but there are some people making YouTube videos are doing it really well. And one thing that I appreciate is that takes an enormous amount of work to do those kind of videos. A tremendous, I mean, the Starsky car videos, that's a lot of hours of matching, and then you're doing all the video and stuff, and then you're going back and forth between them. And so those little moments where it maybe doesn't get quite perfect and people just lose their stuff about it.
Well, there's always that guy or person that's like, well, you didn't set the envelope to the right thing, and you could have, you know, it's like, well, you get up here and do it then, you know?
Yeah.
Some of that's really hard to do, to, like you said, to get them to match exactly.
Yeah.
But they kind of did that with the Oberheim. I mean, they loaded the presets using the tape from the originals into this thing. So they're as close as you're going to get.
Yeah.
To your point, Chris, I've never quite understood that pursuit other than out of curiosity or in trying to verify if a reissue is in fact a reissue. But the idea of chasing that sound and the obsession, especially I've seen in forums of, well, if you want to play and sound like Vangelis, you have to have a CS80 and you need to sell everything you have to get a CS80. And until you're using a CS80, you're not going to get there. You're just going to be pretending to get there. And it's like that whole philosophy to me, thankfully, I never got sucked into it, but I don't really understand that obsession unless you're talking about, okay, we're Sony. We had this huge recording session with the biggest band in the world. They're on tour now. One of the tracks got destroyed somehow. We need to have somebody replay it, but the synth broke. So we need to scour the planet and find another of that exact synth to replace that track on this album because the band's out on tour or whatever. Like, that's the only reason I could justify in my head having to get that synthesizer and sparing no expense. But beyond that, like, I don't know why any of us have to have, quote unquote, that sound.
I think, I'm mostly with you there. I think there can be a pursuit of it that's fun in terms of, like, this is a hobby, you know, some magic piece of gear that, you know, was used a very particular, and see, I don't think it's as interesting with synthesizers because you tend to be a little bit closer in sound. When you start working with organic material like guitars, then it's like, oh, you know, Stevie Ray Vaughan's very particular Strat, what was that made up of? And what is it that make that piece of wood sound like it does? And, you know, those kind of things. Or, you know, people chasing after some tone like Eddie Van Halen's very particular one Marshall that he used on the early albums. And, they can get into it, but at some point, I really agree with you. It's fun for a while. And if it's something that I'm really passionate about, like I'll enjoy kind of going down that. And if it's maybe helps me mod my amp to a sound that I like more or something, well, that's great. But yeah, at the end of the day, you just got to go, okay, but I don't want to be a clone of Vangelis or Van Halen or anybody else. I still want to be my own self as a musician and making my own music. And I want to actually make some damn music, not watch videos all day.
So for me, like I understand what you guys are saying there, and some of that is totally true. But my obsession with some of these especially the reissue, like I'm fine buying reissues. If they do reissues of everything, I'll buy every one of them. Like that's what I want. Because the old ones are ridiculous expensive. We've already talked about this. They're hard to fix, all this stuff. So the modern reissues is the way I wish they would go. And the reason why I want these is because I want to see what I will do with these. So I know that, there's certain sounds in these that are very famous, right? And some of that's cool, but like I'm more interested to see what will I do with this? Something that I know is like got pedigree, right? Yeah. Very famous for XYZ, but what will I do with it? So even if I had a CS80, I might do some Vangelis stuff on there just to be like, that's cool. But then I want to see what I will do with it.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
and
that was right.
Sorry, just real quick. The exclusivity of some of those instruments is part of the reason why they're so desired, right? Mm-hmm. Some of those things you can't get unless you have the thing. So at least to a certain extent. Now the emulation game is getting really good, and there's a lot of options now, and you've got Behringer doing their thing, hit or miss some of it, but they're trying. So there are some options, and that's cool. And that's like I kind of dig that.
Yeah. And for any particular vintage synthesizer, I mean, with the Juno 106, love that sound and got to compare it to soft synths that were, and also including the System 80 to compare the sounds. And they all had their differences, and some sounded better and some, but at the end of the day, it's like we've got so many options now, so many ways to get those sounds. And I think, what we've all said is like, we love those vintage sounds, but we want to move forward and do our own thing. And there's so many opportunities from, reissues like the Mini Moog or OBX8 to, plugins that have the sound of those vintage synthesizers to varying degrees. And we're living in a great time.
Indeed.
I would say that's one of the primary elements that led me to the studio electronics hardware, is because they have a very backward looking mindset. They're looking backward to the past, to all their tones and their circuit designs, but then they're bringing it into more modern workflow and utility. And I feel like that's for my philosophy in anything would be, look at the past, look at what worked, and then try and refine it or improve it in subtle ways without diminishing what made it great in the first place. And so if you can have a company that's doing that with analog equipment, you're bound to have something that sounds really good and fantastic. And then at the same time, you can have a synthesizer that has 4 or 5 different filter circuit designs in there, so it gives you a really broad range to draw from, even though and it's the oscillators are different, so you're never going to get it to sound like the Boomstar or the SE1 or the SE1X. There's and Studio Electronics even makes what they call the MIDI Mini, which is literally a clone of the Model D. And you can still buy that, and it's very expensive, and it's gorgeous, and it's knob per function, and there's no MIDI. I think it can take MIDI notes, and that's about it. Good to see you in the chat there, the S-Rabbit. But again, it's not going to sound like the old Model D. I mean, I'd be surprised if it does. It might, but they're taking hints from the past and bringing them forward, and then throwing in a more circus than you would ever have. And to me, that helps just cover that and satisfy that desire to have those different vintage tones and to sound, kind of in the ballpark, but because, Moog oscillators through an ARP filter is not going to sound like a 2600.
No.
Well, we should probably wrap it up. That was a great conversation. Again, Aaron, thanks for joining us. We always love talking with you.
Happy to pop in. No problems.
Yeah, well,
thanks, Aaron.
We'll you'll be on again. So, hey, what are you guys up to this coming week? What you got cooking?
Go ahead, Marshall.
So I don't know. I'll probably play around in my live setup. I really need to get that finished, or Inky's gonna kill me. So that's I'll probably work on that, I think.
Nice. How about you, Aaron?
I'll just gonna keep whittling away on my imperfect album that's in progress and coming along nicely. I'm gonna start doing demos of the Omega 4 that I have. I'm not quite sure where to start, and I'm kind of waiting till I feel really like I know the synth inside and out, and that's going to take a while, so I can do it justice in the demos and not look like an idiot and have somebody say, "Well, if you did that and that, it would have worked fine. Why didn't you do that? What are you doing over there?"
Anyways.
That's one of the great things about the comment section on YouTube.
Yeah.
And then something interesting that I haven't got into is my sister is a yoga instructor, and she's wanting music appropriate for a yoga class that's very quiet, subdued, and ambient. And so I'm going to be experimenting with some ideas there.
Well, that's cool. Yeah.
And that would be something that I'd probably end up releasing under Point Surrender if it gets to where I'd like to go with it.
But that's got the perfect title, man. Imperfect Yoga. That's awesome.
I think surrender is more of a theme in yoga, but who knows?
Well, yeah.
I'm not a yoga person myself.
I don't know either. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, I got to finish up 3 projects. I just got some big work done, so funner things, I think. But got to do some sort of video stuff for a project that Marshall and Tim and Jamie and I worked on. That it's a really great song, but hopefully we can get that finished up. And then I'm guesting on guitar on one of Brian's songs, Get 70 Music, and so hopefully get to that this week. And what else was I working on? I was working. Oh yeah, we got our intro stuff we're starting to think about. So I'm really looking forward to that too. So that I think will keep me busy for a little while. But yeah, those are fun. It's kind of fun to work on projects with other people and to kind of have some of those experiences. So some of it will be guitar and some synth, and be having some fun. Well, thanks everybody for watching, and even more for chatting. Appreciate you guys in the chat, and then also everyone that comments afterwards. When you leave some comments on our videos, we read those, and it means a lot to us. We like you, even if it's after the fact, to be part of the conversation and of the collective. And, although we don't waste a lot of time on all the regular YouTube stuff that people take up minutes doing, but, if you like it, if you want to subscribe and all that stuff. And, of course, we also do have the Facebook group where we talk about stuff during the week. So all of that said, I hope you guys make some great music this week. Have a good night.